He could buy mayors, silence judges, and wipe a man from existence with a single whisper. Theodore Castile owned this city, but the one thing he couldn't buy, intimidate, or break was her. This is a story of terrifying obsession, a fatal refusal, and a heartbreak that fractured the underworld. The Boston harbor was draped in a thick, salty fog on the morning Theodore Castile walked into Audrey Gallagher's life. Audrey sat in the cramped, glass-walled office, suspended over the bustling floor of Gallagher Freight and Logistics. It was a modest operation compared to the massive conglomerates dominating the eastern seaboard, but it was fiercely independent. Her father, Arthur Gallagher, had built the company from a single rusted flatbed truck into a highly strategic shipping hub on the South Boston waterfront. When Arthur died of a sudden severe heart attack 6 months ago, a medical event Audrey still found deeply suspicious, she inherited the keys to an empire that was clean profitable and entirely in the crosshairs of the city's most dangerous men. At exactly 10 a.m., the roar of the loading docks fell dead silent. Audrey looked up from her maritime ledgers. Through the dirty glass overlooking the warehouse floor, she watched her union workers' men, who had seen decades of hard labor and dockside brawls, step back, lowering their heads. A convoy of 3 obsidian-black Lincoln Navigators had rolled straight onto the warehouse floor, ignoring the heavy, authorized personnel only signs. The doors opened with synchronized precision. Out stepped 4 men in tailored suits, their postures rigid eyes scanning the rafters. But it was the man who emerged from the center vehicle that pulled the air from the room. Theodore Castile. He didn't look like the street-level thugs who occasionally tried to shake down the dock workers. Theodore was 34, impeccably dressed, in a charcoal Brioni suit that clung to a lean, predatory frame. His dark hair was neatly styled, his jaw sharp, and his eyes were a pale, piercing gray that seemed to absorb the dim warehouse lighting. He moved with the terrifying, unhurried grace of a man who knew the world would wait for his next step. For years, the FBI and the Boston Police Department had been trying to pin a sweeping RICO case on the Castile syndicate. But Theodore was a ghost. He operated in the shadows of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and high-end real estate, while simultaneously running a ruthless extortion and smuggling ring that paralyzed the city's underbelly. Theodore didn't look at the workers, his pale eyes locked onto the glass office above. He bypassed the steel stairs and walked directly toward her door. Audrey felt a cold spike of adrenaline punch through her chest, but she forced her hands to remain steady on her desk. She wasn't going to run. The heavy door creaked open. Theodore stepped in, flanked by a broad-shouldered enforcer named Tommy Sullivan, a man whose rap sheet was longer than the Boston phone book. "Audrey Gallagher," Theodore said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, smooth like aged whiskey, but carrying the distinct sharp edge of a straight razor. He didn't ask. He stated her name as if he already owned it. "Mr. Castile," Audrey replied, keeping her voice even. "To what do I owe the pleasure of a fleet of SUVs parking on my loading zone? You're blocking Bay 4. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corner of Theodore's mouth. He waved a gloved hand, and Tommy Sullivan silently backed out of the office, closing the door behind him. They were alone. "I prefer directness, Miss Gallagher. It saves us both the indignity of small talk," Theodore said, stepping further into her space. He casually ran a finger along the edge of her father's mahogany desk, inspecting the dust. "Your father was a stubborn man. A good man, but remarkably short-sighted. I offered him a very generous partnership. He declined. The stress of running this place without the proper backing clearly took a toll on his heart." Audrey's breath hitched. He was admitting it. Without saying the words, Theodore was confirming what the coroner had denied: her father had been murdered. A slow-burning rage ignited in her chest, replacing the fear. "My father built this company on honest work," Audrey said, standing up to meet his gaze. She was smaller than him, but she refused to tilt her chin down. "We don't move contraband. We don't launder money. And we certainly don't partner with the Castile family." Theodore's eyes darkened, the pale grey turning to slate. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a sealed cream envelope, tossing it onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. "Inside that envelope is a certified bank draft for $6 million, Theodore said softly. "It is triple the market valuation of this crumbling warehouse. In exchange, you will sign over a 70% controlling stake in Gallagher Freight. You will remain the face of the company. You will continue to clear customs under your pristine, spotless license. But the manifests for containers 40 through 60 on every incoming European freighter will be handled exclusively by my men." He stepped closer, so close that Audrey could smell his cologne cedarwood and something metallic, like the ozone right before a thunderstorm. "Take the money, Audrey. Live a beautiful, comfortable life. Buy a house in the Hamptons. Travel. But do not make the same mistake your father made." Audrey looked down at the envelope. $6 million. It was a fortune. It was an escape. It was also a blood pact. If she signed, she would become an accessory to human trafficking weapons, smuggling, and narcotics. She would be spitting on her father's grave. Slowly, Audrey picked up the envelope. Theodore's posture relaxed slightly, expecting her surrender. Instead, Audrey held it between her fingers, tore it clean in half, and let the pieces flutter to the floor between his polished Oxford shoes. "Get out of my office," Audrey said, her voice shaking with a dangerous mixture of grief and defiance. "And get your cars off my floor." The silence that followed was suffocating. Theodore didn't yell. He didn't raise a hand. He simply stared at her, his expression shifting from mild amusement to something entirely different. It was a look of profound, terrifying fascination. No one in Boston said no to Theodore Castile. Men had been buried in the foundations of high rises for lesser insults. But looking at the fierce, unyielding fire in Audrey's eyes, a dark, twisted obsession took root in Theodore's chest. He leaned in his lips, brushing mere inches from her ear. "You think you are being brave, Audrey. But bravery without leverage is just suicide." He pulled back his eyes, tracing the line of her jaw. "I won't kill you. That would be a waste. By the time I'm done, you won't just sign this company over to me. You will beg me to take it. You will beg me for everything." Without another word, Theodore turned and walked out. The SUVs rolled away, leaving the scent of exhaust and a lingering, suffocating dread in the air. Audrey sank into her chair, her hands trembling. She had just declared war on the devil himself. Audrey thought the retaliation would be swift and violent. She expected a firebomb through the office window or a hijacked freight truck. But Theodore Castile was a tactician, a man who played chess while the rest of the underworld played with knives. He didn't want to destroy her business. He wanted to capture it intact. More importantly, he wanted to break her spirit. He wanted her submission. The strangulation began 3 days later. It started with the unions. Audrey arrived at the docks at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday to find a picket line blocking the main gates of Gallagher Freight. Men who had worked for her father for 20 years stood in the freezing rain, holding signs demanding better safety conditions and higher wages. Audrey pushed through the crowd, confronting her shop steward, a burly man named Frank Mitchell. "Frank, what is this? We just renegotiated the collective bargaining agreement last month. You know I can't afford a strike right now." Frank wouldn't meet her eyes. He stared at his boots, shifting uncomfortably. "I'm sorry, Audrey. The order came from the top of the local chapter. They said if we don't strike the union, pulls our pensions. There's pressure coming from downtown. Real heavy pressure. You should have taken the deal, kid." With the union on strike, the freight stopped moving. Audrey's warehouse began to pile up with undelivered goods. Perishable cargo spoiled. High-paying clients began calling her office furious about the delays. When Audrey tried to hire independent non-union contractors to move the backlog, their trucks were inexplicably pulled over by the state police. Every single independent rig was issued massive citations for weight violations and improper documentation. The trucks were impounded. Detective Liam Foster, a friend of her father's who worked in the BPD's Organized Crime Division, met Audrey at a quiet diner in Southend later that week. He looked exhausted, nursing a black coffee. "I can't help you, Audrey," Liam said, keeping his voice low, his eyes scanning the diner. "Castile has the local union brass in his pocket. The state troopers pulling over your scabs. They're acting on anonymous tips that your trucks are carrying narcotics. It's a manufactured probable cause. It's totally legal on paper." "He's choking my company to death, Liam," Audrey hissed, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. "My clients are leaving. I'm bleeding cash. Can't you put a wire on me? Can't you arrest him for extortion?" Liam shook his head. "Did he explicitly threaten violence? Did he put anything in writing? Numbert Castile is isolating you. He is cutting off your oxygen. My captain told me to drop the inquiry this morning. That means Castile has reached someone in the DA's office. You need to walk away, Audrey. Sell the company. Leave Boston." But Audrey was too proud. She spent her nights sleeping on the couch in her office, poring over legal loopholes, trying to route her shipments through smaller out-of-state ports. She was running on adrenaline and black coffee, her life narrowing down to a desperate fight for survival. Then came the betrayal that shattered her. Richard Bauer was Gallagher Freight's operations manager. He was a grandfatherly figure who had taught Audrey how to read a freight manifest when she was 10 years old. He was family. On a rainy Thursday evening, Audrey found an envelope on her desk. Inside was a resignation letter from Richard. Panicked, she drove straight to Richard's home in Cambridge. She pounded on the door until his wife let her in. Richard was sitting in his living room, packing a cardboard box. "Richard, what is this?" Audrey demanded, her voice breaking. "You can't leave me. Not now. We're finally getting the route through Providence cleared." Richard looked at her, his face pale and lined with deep shame. "I'm sorry, Audrey. I can't do it anymore." "Why did Theodore threaten you? I can get Liam to arrange protection." "He didn't threaten me," Richard interrupted, his voice trembling. He pointed to a stack of medical bills on the table. His daughter had been battling aggressive leukemia, a fact Audrey knew well. "My daughter's experimental treatments in Switzerland. My insurance denied them. Yesterday, a wire transfer cleared my bank account. $300,000. All the medical debt is paid. The clinic is expecting her on Monday." Audrey froze. The blood drained from her face. "Castile paid it," Richard whispered, burying his face in his hands. "He paid for my little girl's life. His only condition was that I walk away from Gallagher Freight. He didn't even ask me to sabotage you. Just walk away. I'm so sorry, Audrey. I love you, but I love my daughter more. You can't fight a man who buys loyalty with miracles." Audrey left Richard's house, feeling completely hollowed out. Theodore wasn't just a monster. He was a master manipulator. He was surgically removing every pillar of support in her life. He wasn't using bullets. He was using human nature. That night, Audrey went to a secluded bar downtown seeking refuge. She sat in a dark corner booth, nursing a bourbon, staring blankly at the wall. She was out of money. Her staff was gone. Her allies were paralyzed. "It's exhausting, isn't it?" The voice sent a violent shockwave down her spine. Audrey looked up. Theodore Castile slid into the booth across from her. He wore a black cashmere overcoat, raindrops glistening on his shoulders. He looked completely at ease, a dark god admiring his handiwork. "How did you know I was here?" Audrey asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I know everything about you, Audrey," Theodore said quietly. He signaled the bartender for 2 drinks without looking away from her. "I know you haven't slept in a bed in 5 days. I know you missed your mortgage payment on the house in Beacon Hill. And I know you just lost Richard Bauer. You're a sociopath." She spat, though the venom lacked its usual sting. She was just so tired. Theodore leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. The space between them crackled with a dark, suffocating intensity. "I am a businessman who recognizes immense value. I told you I would break you. But look at you." He reached across the table, his knuckles gently brushing against her cheek. She flinched, but she didn't pull away. The touch was terrifyingly gentle. "You are magnificent in your defiance. Most men would have surrendered a week ago, but not you." "I will never give you my company," she whispered. "I don't care about the company anymore," Theodore replied, his pale eyes burning with an obsessive, terrifying hunger. "Keep the docks. Keep the warehouses. I'll call off the union tomorrow. I'll double your clientele." Audrey frowned, confusion cutting through her exhaustion. "What do you want, then?" Theodore's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The raw possession in his stare made her breath catch. "I want you, Audrey. Willingly. I stripped away your friends, your money, and your business, so you would realize that the only thing left in this city for you is me." He pushed a velvet box across the table. It wasn't a business contract. "You are going to be mine, and I will burn the rest of the world to ashes to keep you safe." Audrey stared at the box, realizing with absolute horror that she wasn't a business acquisition. She was his prey, and the cage door had just locked shut. Audrey stared at the velvet box. The ambient noise of the bar, the clinking glasses, the low murmur of jazz seemed to fade into a vacuum. With trembling fingers, she reached out and popped the lid. It wasn't a diamond ring. Inside rested a heavy antique brass key and a meticulously folded piece of parchment. Audrey recognized the thick paper immediately. It was the original deed to Gallagher Freight, the document her father kept locked in his private safe at the bank, the safe that was supposed to be impenetrable. "The key is to the penthouse at the Four Seasons," Theodore said, his voice dropping to a hypnotic, gravelly register. "The deed is yours, free and clear. Tomorrow morning, your workers will return with a 20% pay bump, courtesy of my personal accounts. The state police will return your trucks with a formal apology. Your company will thrive, Audrey. You will be the undisputed queen of the Boston Harbor." Audrey looked up, her pulse hammering against her ribs. "And the price?" "You move into the penthouse." Theodore stated, his eyes locking onto hers with unblinking intensity. "You belong to me. You eat at my table, you sleep in my bed, and you never look at another man for as long as we both draw breath. You give me your loyalty, and I give you the world." "You're insane," Audrey breathed, pushing the box back across the table. "You think you can buy me with the very life you stole? You killed my father, Theodore. I would rather let the docks rot into the Atlantic than let you touch me." Theodore's expression didn't harden with anger. Instead, a flash of genuine, chilling sorrow crossed his face. He leaned back, unbuttoning his overcoat. "I am many things, Audrey. I am a racketeer, an extortionist, and a killer. But I do not lie," Theodore said quietly. "I did not kill Arthur. I was the only thing keeping him alive." Audrey's breath hitched. "What are you talking about? 6 months ago, Carmine Russo and the New York factions decided they wanted a foothold in Boston. Theodore explained, his tone shifting from obsessive lover to cold tactician. They needed a clean port to bring in untraceable fentanyl. They approached your father. He refused them just as he refused me. But the difference, Audrey, is that I wanted to protect his legacy. Carmine just wanted to eliminate an obstacle. Theodore pulled a sleek silver smartphone from his pocket, tapped the screen, and slid it toward her. On the screen was a high-resolution surveillance photo, date-stamped 2 days before her father's heart attack. It showed Arthur Gallagher sitting in a diner booth. Sitting across from him, sliding a small vial across the table, was a man Audrey had known her entire life. Detective Liam Foster. "Liam is on Russo's payroll," Theodore said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "He slipped a synthetic, untraceable cardiac accelerant into your father's coffee. I found out too late. The only reason Carmine Russo hasn't butchered you and burned your warehouse to the ground is because I parked my SUVs on your loading dock. I claimed you. The Underworld knows that whatever is mine, they do not touch." Audrey stared at the photo, the walls of the bar closing in on her. Her father's friend, the man who had sat at their Thanksgiving table, who had pretended to help her navigate the police corruption just days ago. It was a lie. Her entire world was built on quicksand, and the only solid ground was the monster sitting across from her. "If you walk out of this bar without that key," Theodore said softly, "Carmine's men will kill you before you reach your car. I dismantled your life, Audrey, not to destroy you, but to strip away the illusion that you were safe. You are a civilian walking through a war zone in a blindfold." Tears finally spilled over Audrey's lashes, hot and bitter. She was trapped. If she refused Theodore, the Russos would slaughter her and take the company her father died protecting. If she accepted, she was surrendering her soul to a Mafia boss whose obsession was as terrifying as it was absolute. Slowly her hand hovered over the table. Her fingers brushed the cool brass of the key. Theodore's eyes tracked the movement, a dark satisfaction radiating from him. When she finally closed her fist around it, he reached out his large, warm hand, enveloping hers. "You are safe now, mia cara," he murmured. "Let them try to take you from me." For the next 3 months, Audrey lived inside a gilded cage. True to his word, Theodore restored Gallagher Freight to its former glory overnight. Her workers returned, her trucks rolled freely, and her bank accounts swelled. But her personal life was entirely eclipsed by Theodore Castile. He was a terrifying partner. He was possessive, demanding, and fiercely overprotective. Wherever Audrey went, Tommy Sullivan and 2 armed guards shadowed her. Yet behind the closed doors of the penthouse, Theodore was intoxicating. He didn't treat her like a prisoner. He worshipped her. He learned how she took her tea, listened to her rant about global supply chain logistics for hours, and looked at her with a raw, consuming hunger that made her blood burn. Audrey hated him for manipulating her reality, but she was entirely undone by the realization that she was falling in love with the devil. He was ruthless to the world, but to her he was a shield of impenetrable steel. But the Russo syndicate was not done with Boston, and they were not done with Gallagher Freight. The climax of the Underworld War erupted on a freezing night in late November. Audrey and Theodore were attending a private charity gala at the Boston Public Library, an event Theodore used to mingle with the city's corrupt elite. Audrey wore a backless emerald green gown, Theodore's hand resting firmly on the small of her back. For a fleeting hour amidst the champagne and string quartets, they felt almost normal. Then the lights cut out. The heavy oak doors of the reading room burst open. Suppressed gunfire hissed through the darkness, shattering the champagne flutes and sending the city's socialites screaming to the marble floor. "Down!" Theodore roared. In a fraction of a second, his tuxedo jacket was open and a sleek Sig Sauer was in his hand. He tackled Audrey behind a massive marble pillar, shielding her body entirely with his own. Tommy Sullivan and Theodore's men immediately returned fire, the library erupting into a chaotic war zone of muzzle flashes and shattered stone. "Stay behind me, do not move," Theodore commanded, his grey eyes blazing with a lethal, terrifying focus. He wasn't a businessman tonight. He was the apex predator of the Boston Syndicate. "Theodore, what is happening?" Audrey screamed over the deafening echoes. "Carmine!" Theodore growled, reloading his weapon with mechanical precision. He got impatient. Theodore grabbed her hand and hauled her up, dragging her through a side corridor reserved for staff. They navigated the labyrinth of the library's back rooms, moving toward the underground loading docks where their armored car was waiting. But as they burst into the concrete garage, the getaway car was already in flames. Stepping out from behind a concrete support pillar was Detective Liam Foster, flanked by 4 of Russo's heavily armed enforcers. Liam held a police-issue Glock aimed squarely at Audrey's chest. "It's over, Castile," Liam called out, his voice echoing off the concrete. "Carmine sends his regards. Give up the girl and the shipping routes, and I'll put a bullet in your head instead of your knees. It's the best deal you're gonna get." Audrey froze, staring at the man who had murdered her father. The grief and rage she had buried for months erupted, but before she could move, Theodore stepped directly in front of her. "You made a fatal miscalculation, Liam," Theodore said, his voice entirely devoid of fear. It was eerily calm. "You assumed I cared about surviving this." Theodore didn't drop his gun. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket with his left hand, pulling out a small, blinking remote trigger. Liam's eyes widened in horror. "Every pillar in this garage is wired with C4. Liam, I bought the building's security chief 3 years ago." Theodore lied seamlessly, his bluff so absolute, so chillingly confident, that the Russo enforcers actually took a step back. "You shoot her, I drop the trigger, and we all get buried under 10,000 tons of granite and literature." Liam hesitated. That hesitation was all Theodore needed. Theodore raised his weapon and fired twice, dropping the 2 men on Liam's right. The garage erupted into a deafening firefight. Liam fired blindly in a panic. Audrey screamed as Theodore violently shoved her behind a steel dumpster. She heard the sickening thud of a bullet finding flesh. But Theodore was on his knees. "Theodore!" Audrey shrieked, scrambling over the rough concrete, tearing the hem of her emerald gown. She collapsed beside him. His crisp white tuxedo shirt was rapidly turning crimson. A bullet had caught him just below the collarbone, and another deep in his side. He was breathing heavily, his pale eyes losing their sharp focus. "Theodore, no, look at me. I have to call an ambulance." Audrey sobbed, pressing her bare hands against his chest, trying to stem the catastrophic flow of blood. Theodore grabbed her wrists. His grip was weak, but his gaze was fiercely desperate. "Listen to me," he coughed, blood staining his teeth. "The police are coming. The FBI is coming. I orchestrated this." Audrey stared at him, paralyzed by shock. "What? I couldn't protect you forever while running the syndicate. Carmine would never stop coming." Theodore whispered, his hand coming up to cup her tear-stained cheek. "So I made a deal. I handed the FBI every ledger, every offshore account, every corrupt judge in Boston and New York. I gave them Russo, and I gave them my own empire." "Why would you do that?" she cried, her tears falling onto his face. "For immunity." He breathed a tragic, bloody smile, touching his lips. "Complete ironclad immunity for Audrey Gallagher and her company. You are untouchable now. The docks are yours. The city is yours." Sirens wailed in the distance, a cacophony of red and blue lights reflecting off the wet concrete of the ramp outside. "You destroyed everything you built. For me." Audrey choked out her heart, shattering into a million jagged pieces. The monster had ripped down his own kingdom just to build a wall around her. "I told you," Theodore whispered, his thumb brushing her bottom lip as the FBI tactical units swarmed the garage. "I would burn the world to ashes to keep you safe. My only regret is that I won't be there to see you rule it." Federal agents pulled Audrey away, her screams echoing through the garage as paramedics descended on Theodore. Audrey never saw him again. Theodore Castile survived the gunshot wounds, only to be swallowed whole by the federal justice system. He pleaded guilty to federal racketeering charges, refusing to mount a defense, ensuring the trial was completely sealed. He was sentenced to consecutive life sentences in the ADX Florence Supermax prison. He gave up his freedom, his power, and his ghost-like mythos, trading it all for her safety. Years later, Audrey Gallagher stood in the glass office, above her thriving, massive shipping empire. She was the undisputed titan of the Boston waterfront, powerful, wealthy, and completely untouchable. But every night when the fog rolled in over the harbor, she would stare out at the dark water, clutching a heavy brass key in her pocket, her heart permanently broken by the terrifying, beautiful ghost of the man who loved her enough to ruin himself. If this story of dark obsession, sacrifice, and Mafia betrayal kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Right now, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss out on our gripping, real-life inspired audio dramas. Share this video with a friend who loves thrilling romance and drop a comment below. Would you have taken Theodore's deal or fought back? Let us know.